This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch or get 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. Over to you,
Brody.
Very good. You'll find out why that's very good momentarily.
What's up, sports fans? What's up, podcast fans?
Oh.
Or
people
who don't like this podcast and are just listening to fuel your own hatred.
Yeah, and to give us our first 2-star iTunes review. It finally happened, guys.
Yeah.
We had our average thrown off. We had an episode released on the worst idea of all time podcast feed, and we're like, this will be a great boost for us. And the most tangible result we've got from it so far is someone gave us a negative review on iTunes. Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you do like the show, go over to iTunes right now and give us a 5-star review so that we don't suffer any longer, because that's thrown our whole average off. We were at a 4.5 and now we'll be, I don't know, 4?
Yeah, I don't know. But we have had another tangible thing, which is someone reached out to us.
That's true, yes.
That was very
Someone
kind.
named Olivia reached out to us and said that the podcast helped her through a hard time, which is like a message I've wanted to receive ever since I started listening to podcasts.
To just know that other people are suffering.
Yeah, well, because whenever I listen to podcasts and they read out fan mail, they always talk about how it's got them through like hard times, and it's like, one day that'll be us, Richard, and that day has come. So shout out to Olivia.
And while we're giving shout outs, there's a little buddy of mine that I want to shout out.
Mm-hmm.
A little guy you might have heard of called Jaws 1975.
Nice.
So this is welcome along to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast. I am Richard, and that over there is AJ.
Hello, everybody. I'm AJ.
And so this is a podcast where every 2 weeks we watch every film in a sometimes randomly, sometimes Patreon selected franchise, but we'll get to that more later. And then we come here and talk about it for you fine people. So this week it's the Jaws quadrilogy.
Not a lot of people know the diddle part.
Are you alright?
When they're doing, yeah. What?
Are you just making that weird noise?
Yeah.
Are you sick?
Oh my god, it's a shark!
So, the first one came out in 1975. It was directed by Steven Spielberg.
Who?
And what's this one about?
What a good joke. All right, I've written down the synopses for all 4 of these films, saying who's Steven Spielberg.
Oh, I didn't hear you. I just heard you go, fuck, what a good joke. And I was like, oh, no, it's just his name.
I've written down the synopses to all the movies, and they go from short to shorter to longer to very long. So that if that's an indication of the diminishing quality of films, then there you go. So the first Jaws is about the small beach town of Amity Island, USA, is rocked by a string of great white shark attacks which threaten the lives and wallets of the residents of its thriving tourist-based economy. It's up to the police chief Martin Brody, marine biologist Matt Hooper, and professional shark hunter Quint to hunt down the shark and kill it. The classic, the original blockbuster. Is that? Yeah,
that is correct. It's regarded as the first summer blockbuster. I think it was the first film to make over $100 million. It was the highest grossing film of all time up until Star Wars came out a couple of years later. But yeah, this completely, cinema as we know it today wouldn't exist without Jaws.
And it's strange, isn't it? Because it is a blockbuster, but it's also kind of a horror movie, and it's also kind of a B movie. You know, like it's an amalgamation of different things that it doesn't fit into any of the modern boxes of cinema these days.
The modern box offices.
Oh shit!
Whew, oh boy. And so it's based on a book. Interestingly. And apparently, so the book came out in 1974 as well.
Right.
So only a year beforehand. And Spielberg said he read the book and was rooting for the shark because the characters are really unlikable. So I think they maybe changed that a little bit. But 27-year-old Spielberg made this film, and look at what we're doing with our lives.
Yeah, 27 years old, made what is literally one of the greatest, like, examples of the art form of film. And we're here talking about it, 40, 50 years? How much? 40 years later?
100?
100,000 years later. We'll still be talking about Jaws on this podcast.
Yeah. Because this wasn't even, like, his first film as well. It was his third film.
Really? That's still pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely early Spielberg, but so this so he would have been 23 when he made his first film, Jewel, and then 20 when he made Amblin, which is a short film. Fuck that! Imagine being that talented that young.
I don't have to imagine, dude. I'm just talented in different ways.
Nice.
I like to think I'm the Steven Spielberg of podcasting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can be the Robert Zemeckis if you like.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Who do you
Ron
think the better film? Oh. They are very comparable kind of filmmakers.
Yeah, exactly.
But one thing that's like interesting about this film, like you said, it's about not fitting into the box office. What we have today. There is a lot of like subtlety and really interesting kind of like comments on the idea of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, I've heard this before. I don't. Because I knew it's supposedly a film about masculinity. I was reading into it in that way. So I maybe found stuff just because I was looking for it.
Yeah, because I'd say like the three main characters, you got Quint, Hooper, and Brody, who you mentioned. They portray masculinity in different ways. Because like Quint is obviously like brawn and like action, like body, and then Hooper is the brains, and then Brody's like the heart. And so it's three different ways that you are all, arguably masculine in their own way. And the movie, I think, does a good job of shifting between which one you think is right for the job at the time.
Yeah, it's like a video game.
yeah, it is. Like constantly switching between the three characters because of what the side mission currently requires you to do.
Yeah, that's a great way to put
it. But we are covering this because this is Halloween season. It's the spooky season, and what happened was we wanted to cover a spooky franchise in October, so we put it up we put a list of I think 10 horror franchises up on our Patreon, and the one with the most votes won, and it was this one. But I guess it kind of you get a bit of diminishing returns as it goes on. But would you consider this a horror movie?
It is out of the 10 we put up. I think it's the least. It's the one you could apply least horror conventions. Well, maybe actually not. Maybe for the time, it's actually quite trailblazing because it is. I was thinking about it in terms of horror, and I was like, could Jaws fight Freddy and Jason? Like, is he one of these iconic villains? Even though it's a different shark in each film, is he one of these iconic villains that we talk about when we talk about the more like clear-cut horror franchises? I would say this is a scary movie, but I don't know if it's a horror movie.
Yeah, it's also, I guess you have to think about like the 70s as well, that like horror is different. And like we talked about this actually with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre a little bit, that it was like, the going out to the country was safe because you couldn't get hurt out there. And now we associate that with like horror. And I think that Jaws the book, because I think Jaws the book, as far as I'm aware, was quite a big, cultural phenomenon as well. And then the movie coming out a year later, that, it changed people's perceptions of sharks and of the water, essentially.
And quite an inaccurate perception of sharks, as I've come to learn.
Yeah, well, there's actually a thing called the Jaws effect, which is resulted in apparently 1/3 of all sharks are endangered because of this movie, essentially, and the book, is that people just hate sharks. The writer of the book actually, after like this film and stuff came out, he devoted the rest of his life to like promoting awareness that sharks aren't that bad, and that they're misrepresented, and did work for like charities and stuff like that, the conservation, because I mean, I guess they're just misunderstood, but it's people don't feel bad hunting sharks, and so there's a thing called the Jaws effect, which is using something's portrayal in movies or in the media to like fuel your own agenda, like to make people feel a certain way about something. So the Trump campaign was accused of this a lot, with like attacking Muslims and African American people and stuff like that. But it's quite interesting that it's this thing that like if you Google the Jaws effect, it's like the think pieces about it are from like the mid to like 2010s, even though this has been around for 40 years before that.
Yeah, I guess because of the Trump stuff. God, you can find Trump era political commentary in anything, can't you? In the Jaws effect, talking about Jaws. Had you seen this movie before this podcast?
That's a good question. No, I hadn't. This was my go-to film I'm ashamed to say I haven't seen, kind of thing. And I now I'm ashamed to have seen it.
Really?
But I would this is a film because I think there's a movie theater near me that plays old films on like the 35mm, and so I've been to it like once or twice, but they have some real good films on sometimes, and I'm pretty sure it was this. They had Jaws like a couple of months ago, kind of thing, and I almost, maybe I was actually busy that day, but Jaws has been one that since we've done this podcast now, I've like put off watching because I've like,
right.
I don't really watch franchise films in my spare time anymore. Because I don't want to
know when you'll have to rewatch it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but I liked it.
Yeah, did you love it?
Yep.
Would you say you get why it's so highly regarded?
Yeah, I do. I mean, like, okay, let's break it down for a bit. So I think that maybe I can definitely see why this would be someone's favorite film, kind of thing. It's not my favorite film. I can appreciate it.
Okay.
It's funny, like saying, "Oh, it's not my favorite film." It's like that means it's below average, but it's like it literally doesn't. It just means it doesn't hold the place as number one. It could be the second favorite, but no, it's cool, and it's definitely incredible, and did a lot and pioneered a lot of things. But I definitely do want to watch it again, and if there is a screening of it in a movie theater, I would love to go to that, because watching it with like fans of Jaws as well,
yeah, exactly,
would be good, because I think as well my this podcast and my mission to watch a film every day this year has negatively impacted my ability to absorb films.
Right.
So and I'm actually like, I mean, I'm gonna see it through to the end of the year, because we only got a couple of months left, and I'm gonna make it to 400 films this year. But fuck, I'm looking forward to not doing it next year.
Interesting. I'd never asked you about it. I just assumed you were loving it and feeling very cultured and educated.
Because it started as an attempt to watch more like classic films I haven't seen, and there are times, like often on a Sunday, I'll like make sure I put on a film that is one that I've been wanting to watch for a long time. But the amount of times I have to like watch half of a movie before I go to work, and then watch the second half on the bus home and shit like that, and and yeah, it's mostly, most of the time it's just inconvenient, but it is like because I also like, if I've got the day off, I'll often just like watch Mojo and just like YouTube videos while trying to think of a movie to watch, and then it gets too late and you go, oh well. So this is like forcing me to just make that decision. So that was kind of the behind it. But yeah, because I'm absorbing things like so much, it is harder to take in. I read a thing once that was like, you can quite easily remember your phone number, usually. I mean, not so much these days, but you can remember your phone number and maybe your friend's phone numbers or whatever. But if you were given a new string of like 10 numbers every day to remember, and then on like the third day, someone was like, oh, what was the one from 3 days ago, you would struggle to remember it, because you're just getting so much information. And that is kind of what it's like.
Interesting. What
that
an
I'm
interesting
not.
insight.
I like if I see a film in the cinema, it's definitely a lot more. You're in it kind of thing. But
well, that's because you're environmentally.
Yeah, you're
you're
conditioned
associating
to
things.
know that you're watching a movie and you're
Yeah.
absorbing it and stuff like that. And there are certain movies as well that really like drag you in. From when we're recording this, El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie's coming out tonight, and so that's like I'm probably gonna leave my phone in the other room, turn all the lights off, and like do not talk to me while I'm watching this movie, kind of thing. But anyway, that was a bit of a tangent.
Good.
Anyway, yeah, that all to say, I would love to watch Jaws again in a cinema. This isn't to say that I like didn't pay attention to it or like I didn't get it or anything like that. It's just that I have this.
It's a drop in a bucket of every other movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to analyze it so isolated from everything else. And then also immediately following it with 2 and 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's true. I have similar feelings about this film as you, because while I'd seen it before, I'd seen it when I was like 7 or 8, and my parents showed me it in the classic, like, this is the movie that scared mum and dad. I remember there's a part in probably the scariest part of the first Jaws film is when Hooper is in scuba gear and he's investigating a sunken ship, and a decapitated head falls out of the ship, and the music just flares, and it's almost like an early version of a jump scare in a lot of ways. And I remember my mum telling me the story that she walked back into the theater after going to the bathroom, and as she walked back into the theater, that moment happened, and everyone started screaming, and she just was like trying to find her chair while screaming. Screaming. So yeah, I hadn't seen it since I was a little kid. So I'd ostensibly not seen it,
I do wish I'd grown up with this film.
Yeah, totally.
I wish it was ingrained in my culture, and my like growing up the same way something like Back to the Future was.
And it's frustrating because, and I have this with a few different films, which as I've seen as a kid, and then watching it as an adult, where you watch it before you understand what makes a good film, you watch it before you even know you're into film, and you watch it as just whatever, and then as you grow up and as you get into film, you come to find people regard it as one of the best films ever made, and it's like, okay, yeah, I don't disagree. I don't remember enough of the film to be able to jump on that, but yeah, it was cool to see it again and be able to like recognize all the things that makes it one of the greatest films ever made.
Joe, I had that with Spider-Man 2. That was like one that I just saw it and was like, oh yeah, cool, yeah, they made another good Spider-Man movie, fun. And then everyone's like, it's actually one of the best superhero movies of all time, or like one of the best sequels and all the shit. And now I can appreciate it, but for so long I was like, why? I can't really remember what happens in it. I was like, he fights Doc Ock on the train, and yeah. But whereas something like Back to the Future, I think, because I mean, I just fell in love with it when I first watched it because, as a kid, I was like, oh, all this stuff.
It's a lot more accessible for kids than Jaws.
Exactly. It's a family movie. And then, I was able to, I would rewatch it at different stages of my life and get different things out of it and be able to look at it in a different way. And I wish I'd had that with Jaws.
I'll tell you what had more of an impact on me than Jaws was Deep Blue Sea, which I probably saw the same year as Jaws, which is a much less praised film, but a very scary shark movie, and of the very niche subgenre that is shark movie, of which I cannot think of another one except maybe The Meg or Shallows.
There's a few. Yeah, The Shallows, 47 meters down, now 48 meters down.
Have you seen Deep Blue Sea?
No, I haven't.
Very scary when I was 7 years old.
Oh, and Shark Tale?
Very scary.
Martin Scorsese's Shark Tale.
What about Shark Boy and Lava Girl?
Yeah. There's heaps of shark movies. What are you talking about? Let's talk about, because, we both sort of talked about our experience with it. But one thing that I think we both would have recognized and appreciated is, and actually all films kind of have, we'll go through this with all of the films, but the poster for the film, it's like one of the most iconic pop culture images of all time, right?
Oh, and it's a blatant lie about how big the shark is in the film. As well.
But yeah, no, it's such a great. It's just such a great like poster and piece of iconography. Like it's like a little with the woman up top. It's a little bit sexy, and then it's like the promise of fear in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's about what's going to happen. It's not about like. Yeah, but also it has a good tagline. One of a few good taglines in the series. But yeah, just "You'll never go in the water again" was the tagline. We talk about taglines sometimes.
Yeah.
So before we move on, it feels weird to not mention this because we always go on about behind the scenes stuff. But this film surely has like some of the most famous behind the scenes trivia of all time. Like to the point where it feels redundant to say because everyone knows it. But the whole the opening of the film where she's being like thrashed around and you don't see the shark, and then that was supposed to have the shark in that scene, but then it didn't work, so they shot around it and essentially invented suspense in film.
Yeah, they invented the concept of not seeing the monster being scarier than seeing the monster.
Yeah, and so that they had all these problems with these robotic sharks. Apparently, the first one that they got, when they put it on the water, it just sank to the bottom of the ocean,
and it's still there to this day.
It's like, why would you not fucking test that it floats? But I think it was like they didn't understand how the salt water would react with the robotics.
Right.
But I'll just pulled together a couple of fun bits of trivia that I found. Some of these people probably already know. But when John Williams, the famous score, when he first played that to Spielberg, he thought it was a joke. He was like, yeah, that's funny. What do you want to show me the Jaws theme? What you've got, and yeah, and then now he said that he thinks that attributes essentially that with the success of the film.
Well, it's the most it's the biggest its legacy. Like the music is probably next to it's about a shark. The music is probably the thing people will most associate with Jaws.
That's a good point. Apparently, the most famous line in the film. What would you say the most famous line in the film is?
We're gonna need a bigger boat.
It's actually "You're gonna need a bigger boat." But
not as good, but okay.
Apparently, there was actually like a running gag on set because the boats that they got for the crew, etc., were not. Like they're too small, so for like to take their gear around and shit like that, and so every time something would fuck up, they'd be like, "Oh, you're gonna need a bigger boat," and so that was like he just chucked that in the film. It was ad-libbed, and then it became the most fucking famous line of the entire film.
And it's so good. And the shot preceding it, which is the one that you put up on Instagram, where he's like chumming the ocean, and he's like, "Why don't you come down here and chum this shit?" I always remember that clip because he says shit, and it's you forget there's swearing in this movie because it's such a like staple of Hollywood, but it's actually got heaps of swears in it. And then the shark pops up, and then it cuts to the reverse shot, and he like jumps up into frame. Roy Scheider does. The guy who plays Brody.
Yeah, Scheider. Yeah,
Scheider. A man who I recognize him immediately as the guy from Jaws, and have never seen him in anything else.
I thought that as well.
He's got the celebrity, he's got the star power of someone who's been in heaps of different films, but the only other movie I've seen him in was Jaws 2.
He's in 2010.
Well, the 2001
Space
sequel.
Odyssey, yeah.
Wow.
Let's have a look. He died 11 years ago.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
He passed away quite a wee while ago. Well, I'm just having a look through his IMDb to see if there's anything else that jumps out at me. But yeah, well, it's funny. It could have gone very differently if he hadn't starred in Jaws 2, which is the next film we'll talk about. Because he actually he reluctantly returned for Jaws 2, 1978, directed by Jeannot Swark. I don't know. I'm sorry, Jeannot, if you're listening to this.
That won't be the worst thing we say about you and your work coming up, though.
Yeah, so he actually was cast in Deer Hunter in Robert De Niro's role. And
wow.
So he would have been the lead in Deer Hunter, but he had issues on the set and quit. And then they recast it with Robbie D. And then so he was like only allowed to walk away from that film if he agreed to do this. And so he was like, fuck it, okay. And so that was like, to get out of his contract kind of thing. But he got a decent amount of money for it.
For Jaws 2.
Yeah. So what is Jaws 2 about?
This has got to be one of the most uninspired sequels I've ever seen. So, Jaws 2, another shark has turned up in Amity Island, and Chief Brody must once again risk his job, respect of his colleagues, and his own life to defeat this new shark, and save not only the town but his two sons who find themselves adrift in dangerous waters. This time, it's personal.
Nice.
This has got to be the most well-known, least-known movie of all time, right?
Yeah, there was an interesting thing you said earlier this week. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the only reason people know Jaws 2 exists is because Jaws 3D, which everyone knows exists, implies the existence of Jaws 2. The only thing I'd heard about this movie was the tagline, which is probably the best. Is it for this one?
Yeah. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water.
Which is more famous than this fucking movie.
Yeah, it's considered one of the best taglines of all time.
Yeah, and it's like people, repurpose it for their film, and it's one of those things where it's like this thing that you associate with this pillar of pop culture actually comes from the shitty sequel that nobody talks about. It's the before I'd seen this, I remember asking my dad after I'd seen Jaws. I asked him what Jaws 2 was about and if the characters were back. And my dad was like, I think I've seen it. I think Hooper's back. I think Hooper comes back. Who's, what's his name's character? What's that guy's name?
Richard Dreyfuss.
Richard Dreyfuss. And I didn't know what he looked like until I saw his...
Yeah, do you know, because he was in a film that came out like on the 1st of January this year on Netflix called The Last Laugh, where it's him and Chevy Chase. And Richard Dreyfuss plays like an aging guy who used to be a stand-up comedian, and he wants to get back in the game kind of thing. And Chevy Chase becomes his manager or something. It's two, that kind of what I call like blue movies, where it's like two old dudes having fun.
That's not what a blue movie is.
Yeah, it's not at all. Blue movie's like a sex
blue
movie.
movie's a low-budget porn, but please continue.
Yeah, yeah. What is the Anyway, there's a term for old people movies. Old people movies. There's like a subgenre that's something similar to that. Anyway, and I was like, oh, Richard Dreyfuss. That was the first time I'd ever seen him, and I'm pretty sure came out earlier this year. And then when I was watching the film, I thought he was Quint because he looks way more like Richard Dreyfuss looks now.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing I knew about Jaws 2 before I watched it this time was that Hooper returns. And I was like, that makes sense. He's the marine biologist. He's the character who...
They would ask for his expertise and all this shit.
Yeah, and also, so it makes sense if the sequels were about... Or at least the first sequel was Hooper having, as a marine biologist who's, renowned for having dealt with a great white shark, gets asked by another town, this is my continue the franchise almost, to come and deal with another big shark. It's a derivative, but at least you've got a reason why this character would end up facing two great white sharks in his life. But no, my dad was mistaken, and Hooper does not return in any of the sequels, but all the sequels have either Brody, who's in this one, or his sons in them. Meaning that this is like, that's the worst thing about the series, in my opinion.
They should call it Brody, not Jaws.
Well, not exactly. It's more just like, what are the fucking odds that this same family deals with a shark 4 times across their lives?
Yeah, but then once we get to Jaws 4, we'll get on about
Jaws 4 is even I can't. This movie feels like it's made for It feels like home video wasn't a thing yet, and so they made Jaws 2 to remind everyone what Jaws 1 was like. It's so similar. It's so similar, but nowhere near as good. It's so boring. It feels like it goes for 100 years.
Oh my god, yeah.
It's a touch more ridiculous as well. Like you see the shark get set on fire at a couple points. It actually gets killed by biting onto an electrical cable under the ocean that fries it.
Yeah, and it's very clearly like foam rubber being burnt. Like it's not burning like flesh.
Yeah, and you would hope that maybe like a big part of the first film is the fact that the mayor of Amity Island doesn't want to announce like that there's a shark because it is bad for business. And you would hope at least they come up with a different like interpersonal conflict for the sequel, but no, it's the same thing. The mayor's like, I don't want to announce this again. He ends up getting fired.
It's the same mayor.
It's the same
mayor.
Well,
no, because so not only because apparently according to Jaws wiki, it takes place about 4 years later. So the sons have aged a little bit and shit like that. But because it's 4 years later, not only has the mayor not been fired, but he's been re-elected at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
very strange.
And because it's like kind of implied in the first film that Amity's like a place where nothing happens, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's this series of shark murders, which would make like national news. And so this mayor is known for one thing only. And it's feeding the people in his town to a shark.
Yeah.
And he somehow got elected again.
Why is Amity what
was his re-election campaign slogan?
There's not gonna. It'll be. You are now safe to go back in the water, thanks to me, whatever his name is. But like what, or at the very least, Amity would be. You know how like there's that guy who suffered 8 lightning strikes in his lifetime, like the world record for most times struck by lightning. It'd be like that. It'd be like the town of Amity has the world record for most great white shark attacks. You know, but they don't do that at all throughout these films, and it seems so obvious that the route to go with making sequels to this would be completely isolated different stories about shark attacks in different parts of America, new characters, you know, but they don't. They even past the point where it's marketable to get Roy Scheider back on board. It should be Schneider, just for the record, but it's not.
It should be Rob Schneider in the film.
It should be Rob Schneider should star in the Jaws remake. They, you know, the second 2 films are still about the Brodies, and it doesn't make any sense, especially when we get to 3D. The career paths these people choose after having life-altering experiences when they very nearly got eaten by a shark is insane that they would do the things they do later on in their lives. But that's all set up in this film, which is it's not this. I would say this series is like this is such a quintessential franchise in a way because each film is like half as good as the last one. But this is that we've talked about this a few times recently. This is one of those situations where I'd rather watch Jaws 3D than Jaws 2, even though Jaws 2 probably has more craft involved.
Yeah.
It is not as fun to watch because Jaws 3D is more ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say about the halving thing because I think we forgot to mention the Rotten Tomatoes scores. If you're interested, the first Jaws has 98% and Jaws 2 has 60%.
That's so high by today's. What 60% means? I wouldn't call this a fresh movie. I wouldn't put it much below fresh though. I'd go like 50%.
But a couple of interesting things. So, this film actually originally had like a way darker, more kind of subtle tone. So it was going to be about Amity would have been like a complete ghost town essentially, and officials of the town would be in debt to the mafia who had like funded a new resort to try and get people back kind of thing. And so it was going to be like all this other like stuff, and this John D. Hancock was writing and directing it, and a month into production the execs said actually people watched the first one not for the subtle story elements, but because of a big shark. So
that sounds so much cooler, that idea. And
so they were forced into a more lighthearted approach, and I think like this film came out not in the same year as Halloween, which obviously it didn't invent the slasher genre, but it really pushed it to the forefront of what's expected of horror.
Mm-hmm.
And there are like slasher elements to this film.
Sure.
It's got a lot of there's a lot of sexy teens.
Yeah.
Who and then they sort of start to do a picked off one by one thing, but don't really go all the way with it.
Yeah, and there's like cosmic punishment for being promiscuous, and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it does seem like they had those elements were like consciously added.
Yeah, no, and that's what I was sort of saying before is like, who do you think would win in a fight between all our like horror icons and then also the shark from one of the Jaws movies?
Yeah, it does actually depend on which movie.
Yeah, have you got a kill count by chance for each movie? Because the shark is different in each film, and I believe in the first film he was actually referred to as Bruce on set. Is that correct?
Yeah, he also Spielberg also called him the Great White Turd.
Well, we'll go with Bruce. And so I wonder if I like that in terms of like it's referring to the mechanism with which the shark kills people and not the name of the shark. It'd be like if it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It'd be like if it was called Chainsaw, but it is called that. It's about the weapon with which it enacts its horror and violence, and which with all sharks apparently, but also not in real life, enact violence.
All right, I think so. This could be inaccurate, but just be a ballpark figure anyway.
Be a ballpark. Don't look at my beard balls.
Entire ballpark. So I think Jaws has 9 deaths.
Really? I thought it was less than that. I thought it was much less.
That's including the shark as well, actually.
Okay.
The second one has 10.
Mm-hmm. You said 10 like you were explaining the Kiwi accent to someone who doesn't.
Yeah, I thought that.
10?
3 has 8.
All right, this is not providing the fodder for conversation that I was hoping it would.
And The Revenge has 6.
What the fuck? Okay, that's very strange. If that's true. I felt like watching Jaws, I remember feeling like, how many people even die in this movie? It feels very... Although, I guess the decapitated head in the ship and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, cool.
I didn't realize this until this is on this thing. That the sharks are called Bruce in the first one, Brucette in the second one, Brucetta in the third one, and Vengeance in the fourth.
Who would win in a fight between all 4 of them? Which Brucette is the one who's killed the most?
Yeah, I almost think Brucetta though.
Yeah, that's the most angry one.
Yeah, like in the third one. It's we'll get to that. But I actually couldn't find the quote anywhere, but we've talked about it before, and I think it's from J.J. Abrams, but talking about how Jaws is about masculinity and about a man trying to find his place in the world, and Jaws 2 is about a big shark.
Oh, it's the philosophy with which I hang all my film theory on. Like, that changed my life. I think it's in his Magic Box TED Talk.
Yeah, but then I scrolled through it and I read the transcript and I couldn't find it, but I remember hearing it in there as well.
We've talked about it many times on this podcast, but I've repackaged it as Aladdin is about self-worth and Return of Jafar is about the Return of Jafar, which is a more extreme fall from quality, because there is enough substance in Jaws 2 to feel like it's maybe about something, but it's nowhere near as clear-cut. The lasting scene that stays in my mind of the internal story of Jaws is the scene where he's sitting at the dinner table and his 4-year-old son is mimicking he's got his hands on his face and his son Sean copies him, and it's, I don't know, that scene's just very sweet to me, and it stays.
The J.J. Abrams says that's one of his favorite scenes.
Maybe that's why it stuck with me. Yeah.
Because when he's like, "Give me a kiss," and he's like, "Why?" He's like, "Because I need it."
Yeah, that's cool. I should try that. On
masculinity.
Asking, no, that real talk. Those are very positive messages for masculinity. It's, a movie that came out in 1975, you would almost, not forgive it, but understand why it might have some quite reductive ideas to say. But it's more that it's like being a man is being okay, being comfortable and being able to ask for what you need. And
being a man is being okay. Never show weakness.
Actually, no, it's the opposite. It's being a man is looking after your mental health. That scene shows us. There you go. It's Mental Health Awareness Week, I think, right now.
Your day yesterday or something like that.
Ticked. Yeah. Box ticked.
Take that, box. Yeah, I think you mentioned this I think you made a video about it, but about how a good movie doesn't have to be good. A good movie is with 3 good scenes and no bad ones. And you mentioned that The Lost World, Jurassic Park, is like an example of, it's considered a bad film because it has all these good scenes.
A movie with 3 good scenes and 1 bad one.
Yeah, but and because I almost think that Jaws 2 kind of reminds me of The Lost World in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree, and it's funny that it's Spielberg's legacy.
It's a sequel to a Spielberg film.
Yeah.
They hadn't direct this one, but it's like it's got some good stuff, but it's just boring. I mean, I guess less in this one. I don't have as much to like point out as being like this is what ruined it for me.
It's honestly, it's a piece of cardboard. It's one of those things where it doesn't dip into the ridiculous. It doesn't dip into the stupid. There's no Jar Jar Binks in this movie, or to use The Lost World again, there's no teenage gymnast kills a velociraptor in this movie. It's actually quite harrowing. Like the experience of the teenagers stuck at sea is terrifying, but because so much of it just feels like retreading the first film, it's just such a boring and uninspired journey, I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
Let me ask you this, as like a transition between the first 2 and second 2 films.
Oh, I was just trying to think of a question to ask you as a transition.
It's nothing to do with it, but it could be a fun little discussion point. Do you prefer Jaws or Jurassic Park? What's the better Spielberg film?
I mean, personally, I prefer Jurassic Park.
So do I, but does it not feel like Jaws has more prestigious clout in the world of film?
Well, just because it's older.
Yeah, is that because those things are decided by the people who were too old for Jurassic Park when it came out?
Yeah, I think it's funny how similar they are in a lot of ways. Like they kind of scary.
Right?
They're like family films.
Yes.
They're directed by Steven Spielberg. They're actually about something.
They're movies you can watch with the whole family, but for no reason. Like, they both got swearing and violence and, terror in them, but it's like, these are family films in some weird way. God, Spielberg was good. for a guy no one talks about his films anymore, man, these were good films.
Yeah.
We made some amazing films. What a hot take. Maybe the hottest take Cole Popture has ever given. Steven Spielberg is a good director. And furthermore, he's not as good as he used to be. What a hot take that is.
It's funny because I was actually thinking about... So Jaws came out in 1975, and then, 18 years later, he made Jurassic Park. And so 18 years after Jurassic Park, he made Warhorse.
Completing his trilogy of terrifying animal movies.
It was the same year, actually, to be fair to him, it's the same year he made Tintin. Yeah, which I haven't seen, but it's probably better. It's better than... I just haven't seen Warhorse. So, anyway. We got Jaws 3D, and according to the tagline, the third dimension is terror.
Wow.
That's actually the tagline for the film.
That's so bad, isn't it?
Like, people see the poster and like, 3D? What's the third one? Oh, it's terror.
Oh, terror, right. Okay. It's not, proportional awareness or whatever, spatial awareness. What's that word called?
It's the Z-axis, essentially.
Yeah, the Z-axis, yeah.
Depth perception.
Depth perception, that's what I was thinking of. The third dimension is depth perception. So this is like the third, if you count Machete and Spy Kids as one franchise, this is our third franchise in a row, which has had a 3D film, but each released their 3D film in a very different time in the lifespan of 3D as a gimmick. Because Spy Kids 3D, this is also the third where the 3D movie is actually officially called name of movie 3D, which isn't always the case.
Yeah, well, because this was done after the success of Amityville 3D and Friday the 13th Part 3.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go. So that's that time era, right? So Jaws 3D was the first one in this timeline, and it was the very first invent of 3D as a gimmick for films. So you've got your red and blue glasses. It's very rudimentary 3D. And then next in the line is like Spy Kids 3D, which was like the throwback, the resurgence. Remember 3D, kids? And then somehow Spy Kids 3D led to Avatar, which led to Texas Chainsaw 3D, which is like the middling, dying end of the 3D resurgence. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was somewhat interesting that we would get these three franchises in a row that each boast a different example of a kind of quite a specific aspect of film packaging, I guess,
And what's it about, actually?
What's it about? Jaws 3D is set at it's got to be set at least 15 years or so since the last film, because Mike Brody is now played by Dennis Quaid, who's, how old would you say he is in Jaws 3D?
80?
The actor, I mean.
Yeah.
What? No, he's got to be in his mid to late 30s, right?
Do you want me to actually find out? Dennis Quaid, I searched.
But this, my point being is it's set something like, it was made like 4 years after Jaws 2, but they've aged them up quite a lot.
Yeah, in the film he's like 29, and while filming. So we could say early to mid 20s is probably what they're going for.
So Mike Brody, son of Martin Brody, is now the chief engineer at SeaWorld, and his younger brother Sean shows up, who's also from, you saw these guys as kids and teenagers in the second film.
Who's also played by Dennis Quaid.
No, but Leah Thompson does play his girlfriend in it.
Yeah.
And it was cool to see Leah Thompson in another film, because she starred in Back to the Future, Howard the Duck, and then nothing else. But that's not true. Jaws 3D. His younger brother Sean shows up, and the brothers find themselves once again confronting a great white shark, which has somehow found its way into the park. Also, it's 3D. I would say this is out of the four films, obviously enjoyed the first one. This is the closest I came to enjoying one of the sequels, would be Jaws 3D. I thought that it was funny in a lot of places. It's also the most different. It's the only one that's not set on Amity Island. And it does feel like, were this series to be given the Friday the 13th treatment and given hundreds of sequels, this is a good idea. The water park.
Yeah.
It's the in space. It's the sequel trope. It's the Prince and the Pauper almost kind of. You know what I mean? Like it's an obvious place to change the environment of a sequel and then essentially just do the same thing and make it feel fresh. What does this have on Rotten Tomatoes?
Do you want to guess?
So the last one was 60. I'm going to guess this is lower, despite saying I enjoy it more. I'm going to guess sub 30.
You're correct. It's got 10.
That's so low, isn't it? Do you think it's a 10% movie?
I think it exemplifies what a 10% movie, or what people think of when they think of a 10% movie.
Is there a movie more visually dated
is there a movie?
Than Jaws 3D?
Yeah, I know.
The 3D in this movie, it looks like crepe paper cutouts.
Yeah, it's really strangely done, because it looks like something's been very early 80s, late 70s green screened onto it. It's very clearly two pictures, and it's also the entire film is lower quality because you're only getting one eye's scan of because you can't watch it in 3D. And apparently, between when it was released in cinema and 2016 when the actual 3D Blu-ray came out, there was very few ways to see this in 3D, and
what a strange way to look after your multi-million-dollar film.
Yeah, but because you need special TVs and all the stuff that just wasn't available for home release. But yeah, so it's one funny thing in this film is this is when we sort of the shark really starts to have agency, and it starts to act a lot more like your Jasons and your Freddys. Yeah. He's methodical.
What's a she? It's Brucetta.
True.
It's the mother of a so they catch a shark in this, and I was like, that's Jaws. He's not very big, and then it turns out it's a baby Jaws, and then the mother turns up.
Baby Jaws do.
Dun 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 dun. Baby Jaws do 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 do.
That's got to exist. That mashup like that.
It's got to.
Anyway, yeah, like
Another shark movie.
He skins someone and then like places the corpse like in view of people. Like the shark in this film. Sorry, I keep saying hey. She clearly
you sexist chauvinistic pig. It's
she
a
clearly
woman.
is.
Women can be sharks too.
She clearly is trying to mentally torture her victims as well as like the one where the death where she someone like ends up in her mouth and instead of like ripping him to shreds, she just like leaves him in there until he thinks he has a grenade. And then and that's when she finally like crushes him.
It takes away what you could argue is the point of the first film, which is that this is a man versus nature. This is a chaotic force.
Yeah.
It's not personal. That's almost what's so good about the first film. It's not personal.
It's just business.
It's just business, baby.
And then also there's the very Saw-esque moment where one of the characters is like given the choice between saving two people.
Yeah.
The shark's dark, man.
It's a dark shark. It's a great dark shark.
So, before I get into even before watching Jaws, this is one of my like ultimate missed opportunity films.
I'm ready.
But not because of this, but this is also a missed opportunity. I'd stumbled across this and thought it was very funny. But the writer in this film was like forced to write a role for Mickey Rooney. Like the producer was like, "We got to get Mickey Rooney in this film. You need to write a role for Mickey Rooney." And do you remember who Mickey Rooney played in the film?
No, I didn't know he was in it.
No, he's not, because he wasn't available. And so the writer was just like, well, fuck, I'm going to cut the character then, aren't I? But so, this film, Jaws 3D, after making the first two Jaws, two of the producers thought we needed to take the sequel somewhere interesting. So they went to, I haven't written down the guy's name, Maddie Simmons, I think his name was, who was working at National Lampoon, which was hot off the back of Animal House. And they said, we want to do a sequel that's like a spoof, take the franchise in a new direction. He wrote a script called Jaws 3 People Zero.
Very cool.
Yeah, or Jaws 3 People Nothing, but you get the point.
Which is inaccurate because it's actually People 2.
Yeah.
Jaws 0.
But
well, though, I guess, unless you mean, if we're talking kill counts, then it's not 3. Anyway.
Yeah. It's a joke. So they spent $2.5 million on pre-production for this film. So John Hughes co-wrote the script. John Hughes, who would go on to write 16 Candles and Breakfast Club and all those kind of movies. Richard Dreyfuss agreed to star in it.
No shit.
Joe Dante who's of course of
Gremlins,
Looney Tunes Back in Action fame. Was signed on to direct or was, in talks to direct. And so what the brief kind of synopsis of the film. So opened with the guy who wrote the book, Peter Benchley, who wrote the Jaws novel, diving into his pool and getting attacked by a shark. And then it ramped up from there. The cast and crew. So it was going to be about another Jaws film being made. And
the meta sequel.
Yeah, and then the cast and crew keep annoyingly getting eaten by sharks, including the director would keep getting his toes bitten off by sharks, but would treat it as a minor irritation. Now, Spielberg didn't take too kindly to being made fun of and for his film to be made fun of, so he said, I will never set foot on Universal lot ever again if you make this film. And they said, oh no, we better do what Spielberg says. So instead they made Jaws 3D. Which is
fucking Spielberg,
known for being like an awful sequel.
This is the late 80s equivalent of him ragging on Netflix.
Yeah, but fuck, how cool. Imagine if like the legacy of Jaws was that the third one is a parody.
That's so strange. I kind of get where Spielberg's coming from.
Yeah.
But he didn't foresee the fact that like
the one they made instead is terrible.
Yeah, and it's a lot less interesting than than where
Yeah,
it could have gone.
and also because he didn't return to the second one because he was like, I've already made the best shark movie. You know, like I've already made the definitive shark movie. And when the original director was fired or quit or whatever, apparently there was like one weekend where he briefly considered returning and like wrote a treatment for what he thought the story should be, but then was like, no, actually, I don't want to do it. And he was too busy with Close Encounters at the time as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. What a life. This franchise is much more interesting behind the scenes than
hard
in
out
front of. Because, and like that's the thing is that, and I said this to you when people were voting for it, is like it's interesting that people want us to cover the Jaws franchise because it's not known because of it being a franchise. It's known for being the best movie of all time, and it happens to have sequels. You know, this isn't like, I don't know, Fast and Furious. Yeah, where it's like it's well known because of it being a franchise. This is like by chance it's a franchise.
Yeah.
And it's like the first film is as good as its sequels are bad.
Yeah. Also, interestingly, I forgot to mention the last little thing before we move on about Jaws 3D. So it was directed by a guy called Joe Alves, who this is his only film.
Wonder
he was
why.
Producer on the first two. And then,
that's such a shitty joke to make. That was the opposite of me saying who when you mentioned Steven Spielberg at the start. Be like, oh, wonder why. I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sure. What else has he got? Other filmmaking credits?
Yeah. Well, he produced the first two.
So it's a what was the Simon Kinberg?
Nepotism.
Another guy who directed Dark Phoenix.
Yeah, it is Simon Kinberg. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fun. I'm not going to explain that reference for people who don't know the industry as well as you and me.
Yeah, except like you started to explain it and then you bailed.
That's good podcasting.
Now that's what I call podcasting volume 3.
Now that's what I call podcasting volume 3, people 0.
Fantastic.
This is the stuff. This is what the guy who gave us a 2-star review didn't hear. Although he did say we seem like nice guys, which is almost worse.
Yeah.
That's what sucked about that review, is it wasn't that negative, and then he gave us 2 stars.
No, it was pretty negative.
Well, you know, you got to look up and move on. Please, again, review us 5 stars on iTunes. I'm going to start saying that heaps now at the start of every episode to get people to do it.
All right, so now we're up to Jaws: The Revenge, directed by Joseph Sargent. And what's this one about?
0% on Rotten Tomatoes.
0% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Surely, God, what a fuck. This movie's a fuck. I hated this movie. Jaws: The Revenge. Seemingly ignoring the events of Jaws 3D, Michael Brody returns to Amity to console his mother Ellen after her youngest son and Michael's younger brother Sean is killed by a great white shark. And when that happened, I was like, holy shit. Did Spielberg know about this? That's a horrible thing. That's such a sin of them. Like it's like in Alien 3 how Newt is dead at the start of Alien 3, and it's the whole like emotional driving force of Aliens. Yeah. So Alan is convinced that the shark that killed Sean, the shark that killed Sean did it as revenge for the now deceased Martin having the first Brody, the main Brody from the first film, who's now passed away.
Brody Alpha.
Prime Brody, Alpha Brody. Alpha Brody sounds like what the actual alphabet. So yeah, she thinks that the shark killed it as revenge for Martin Brody killing the original shark. So Michael, his wife, and his young daughter convince Alan to come spend Christmas with them in their new home in the Bahamas. I don't know if it's their new home, but it's where they live. However, it turns out Alan was right and the shark is after the titular revenge and follows them to the Bahamas, which they say in the film is too warm for a shark, to finish what it started and end the Brody bloodline once and for all. This time, it's personal again.
Wow, it's funny you bring that up because so the tagline for this film was "This time it's personal."
Oh.
But you think, unoriginal. But it is original because this
shit.
coined the term.
Oh my God. Oh, of course it did. Oh my god, this is the now it's personal movie?
Yeah.
Oh,
This time it's personal. Imagine that.
again, probably more staying power than the movie itself.
Probably more staying power than the first Jaws.
Yeah, probably. The other main things people know about this movie is I know that people know that it's about a shark following people to the Bahamas. Because
I didn't know that, but that's fucking hilarious.
That's like people. Do you know Jaws 4 is about this? People also know that Michael Caine, who's the most famous person in the whole franchise, has a secondary role, or not even. It's basically a main character in this film. And he's. Do you have the quote? Should we do the quote?
Oh yeah, I do. So I've actually there's a few people like who talked about starring or not starring in this film. But this is one of Sir Michael Caine's notorious paycheck movies he refers to. So there's The Swarm, Ashanti, Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, The Island, which is also another adaptation of a book by what's the guy's name? Peter Benchley. And that was a flop as well. The Hand and Blame It on Rio. When Caine was asked about this movie in an interview, he answered, "I've never seen it, and by all accounts, it's terrible. However, I have seen the house that it built, and it is terrific." Because he got paid $1.5 million for 7 days of shooting in the Bahamas.
Richard, do the accent and the quote. Come on.
I've never seen it, but by all accounts, it's terrible. I've seen the house that it built, and it is terrific.
My favorite part of Michael Caine's performance in this movie was he's like the like biplane pilot that flies them around the Bahamas. Biplane. And he's telling them the story. At some point he's in the plane and he's telling someone a story about like one of his travels to like the Amazon or something like that. And I was like, this is his line from The Dark Knight. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Tangerine.
Like you could size of a tangerine. You could like splice those two scenes together and it would sound like one consistent story.
That's so funny. So Roy Scheider was offered a cameo but declined, stating that Satan himself could not get me to do Jaws 4. Reportedly, if he had accepted the bit part, the shark would have killed his character at the start of the movie. The end result
that's what it feels like he's going for.
Archive footage. But yeah, it is. He was meant to like kill him. Imagine that.
But instead they went for it to be Sean. And when he died, I was like, I immediately thought back to that scene where he's mimicking Brody in the first movie. And I was like, in Jaws canon, like the official, I have to decanonize this movie because now whenever I see Jaws again, I'm going to see that sweet, beautiful, profound scene where he's like, give me a kiss because I need it. And know that in canon, that kid gets eaten by a shark. He's like, gets tormented by one in Jaws 2. And then in Jaws 4, he suffers the worst, like his worst fear. Do you ever watch ER where the guy got his arm chopped off by a helicopter, dies by getting crushed by a helicopter? It's like that thing.
Really?
Yeah. It's like, it's so brutal. It's so brutal. And it made me so angry and I couldn't concentrate on what is like, there are much more like ridiculous things in the movie, but I was like, they killed off the little kid. Like he's grown up, but it's like, oh my God.
Also, Murray Hamilton, because Roy Scheider wasn't the only person that turned down a role. Murray Hamilton was asked to reprise his role as the mayor in a short appearance at the start, but instead he died of cancer before filming started.
Better way to go. Sorry. Does this ignore Jaws 3D?
It does ignore Jaws 3D. It's not considered canon by the makers of this film, and one of the press releases for Jaws: The Revenge says the third film in the remarkable Jaws trilogy.
Jaws 3D is so much better than Jaws: The Revenge.
That's what's funny, eh? Like making the call to be like, actually, you know what? Ignore 3. This time it's personal.
It's the Terminator again. It's the Terminator's various attempts to make a third film.
And now that Dark Fate looks like shit too.
Yeah, we'll find out. We will find out.
Well, I won't because I don't care.
Well, you'll still find out if it's good or not.
No, I'm not.
And we'll ignore critical reception.
Because Terminator 2 is my other big, other than Jaws is the other big, I haven't seen it. film. So maybe we could cover it for Dark Fate. But anyway, you were saying.
What was I saying? This is good podcasting.
Yeah.
No, man. Like because Dennis Quaid doesn't return as Michael, and the guy who plays Michael looks way younger than Dennis Quaid. So I was like, how is this set before Jaws 3, but then also clearly after because one of the characters dies in it?
Yeah.
Anyway, oh my god, it's so bad, and it's just laughable. This whole movie's laughable, and I thought it was dumb, and I hated it.
Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah?
No, I don't. It's interesting. There's a couple of endings to the film as well. So in the original theatrical version, Alan rams the shark with Mike's boat, mortally wounding it. The shark then causes the boat to break apart with its death contortions, forcing the people on the boat to jump off to avoid going down with it. American audiences disapproved of this ending. However, a different ending was ordered to be shot for foreign distribution, which the shark gets stabbed and then explodes.
That's the ending I saw.
Yeah. And so...
is that what you saw as well?
No, I saw the jumping off the boat one.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's... Yeah, because the one you saw is the infamous like cable ending that is like considered awful.
Wait, so say again what happens in the one you saw?
The shark... No, so the shark gets rammed with the boat, which kills it. And then the boat also breaks apart and they all have to jump off board.
Right, so they essentially end pretty similarly.
But so did you like how so she remembers she like remembers back to the first film when it's like what is it, like something you bitch, when he like shoots the shark. Smile you son of a bitch. Yeah.
What a fucking good one-liner, right?
Yeah. But do you like how, like she manages to remember something that only the shark heard?
Yeah, and only Brody experienced. Yeah. And another one of these flashbacks that they do is to the aforementioned scene where Sean is mimicking Brody, the scene I keep talking about. And it's like, when they showed that, I was like, don't show me it. Oh my God. This movie, like, it made me sad, but it was also a bad movie. So it's not like it's like, oh, it's really challenging. It's a really challenging movie. It's just like, this movie fucking sucks. It's so bad.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it's one of the worst movies we've watched. Because it isn't.
Oh, no,
I'm sorry.
Close.
No.
So there's a fun thing. TV Tropes has a page called Voodoo Shark, which refers to a trope which is explaining a plot hole with another plot hole. And it's named after the novelization for Jaws: The Revenge, where
which was written novelizing the movie. The movie's not based on.
Yeah. So so you can read the movie if you want. Often they add scenes and you get an insight into what the characters are thinking in certain scenes as well. So they're quite interesting for extra. Well, I say canon, but they're not really considered canon necessarily. So it turns out a voodoo curse has been placed on Martin and his family, and that is to explains how a shark understands the concept of revenge and how it's able to keep finding them. However, the writer does not bother to answer the question of why the voodoo curse was made in the first place, or any of the other countless questions that you might have. But it goes, oh yeah, it was because of a voodoo curse. That's why it understands revenge and why it's following us. Anyway, moving on. But yeah, so other example, the dialogue example from something else that it has on TV Tropes is in the Futurama episode where they're underwater and Hermes' like thing, his like shelter is burned down, and then he's like, wait, how did this even happen? And then it's revealed that it was Bender's cigar that he left there. He's like, this raises further questions. And like another example, because it's like, wait, how did it burn down? Oh, because of the cigar. But then wait, how does he have a cigar? Essentially, in any answer that makes you do that.
It's The Simpsons with why are the kids here? Because we didn't want to leave them here. Why is Grandpa here? Because Jasper didn't want to come on his own. That's the line. And Jasper's the least appropriate person to be in the car.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
All right, it's time to continue the franchise.
Oh, already? My goodness, I've not even dressed, Richard.
I was like, fuck, do you not think we've talked about Jaws 4 enough? Like, I mean, we've, in much the same way of the quality of the film, I think we've like halved the how much we've talked about.
Oh, but it does not deserve any more.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
I do not want to grace this movie with any more dialogue.
Yeah. So there is a film called Jaws 5, Cruel Jaws.
Cruel Jaws.
So
Why didn't
what
we
did you
watch
think
it?
of that?
Oh, how embarrassing. Oh my god, I didn't watch
no,
it.
there's like this Italian. There's a few like unofficial sequels and like rip-offs. I mean, it invented a genre essentially. And so there's a lot of things that owe their life to Jaws. But yeah, there's this Italian
Placid?
rip-off film, called Jaws 5, and apparently by all accounts, it's not very good.
Tremors? We should watch Tremors.
Now,
Yep.
you just listen to like 10 hours of us watching.
Yeah.
watching Tremors.
That's Jaws in the desert. Tremors.
Yeah. There's a few video games. One's called there's Jaws Unleashed, one simply called Jaws, and an arcade game called Shark Jaws.
Human Jaws.
There's a Japanese comic book based on the first movie, which has a lot of titties and a lot of blood.
Wow.
Which is
just like the human body.
But also it's worth mentioning, in addition to the 3 sequels we watched, there's another 15 sequels out there in the ether. I'm referring, of course, to a joke from Back to the Future Part 2.
Right.
Where Marty McFly arrives in the distant future of 2015, and it's so funny how much Back to the Future as a franchise has changed now.
Yeah, I was
now it's a joke that they went to the past, because even in 2010 it was like 2015 was still the future, but now it's like 4 years ago. It's crazy. But anyway, so they, to commemorate the 2015 re-release of Back to the Future, they actually made a sequel for Jaws 19. And so there's a bit in the film where Marty arrives in the future and this giant holographic shark eats him, and it says it's directed by Max Spielberg, which is Steven's son, which again is also funny that Steven, there's no reason he wouldn't direct it. He's still working just as much as he was back then. But yeah, they released a trailer which explains what all of the films in between are. So it says, Jaws made you afraid to go in the water. Jaws 2 made you afraid to go back in the water. 3D was a new dimension in terror. In Jaws the Revenge, it was personal. In 5, it was just business, and the logo has the S as a $sign. And then 6, it was strictly for pleasure. And then Cyber Jaws made you afraid to log on. Robo Jaws made you afraid of robotic sharks. Jaws 9, Brody's grandson assembled oh Jesus, I fucked that up. Jaws 9, Brody's grandson assembled a team of shark hunters. Then in Jaws 10, it was man versus shark versus all the horrors of the deep, and the logo has octopus tentacles coming out of it. And they just says, then in space, Jaws 11. Then 12 was a prequel and called Jaws 12, and then this Jaws 12 Part 2 is a sequel to the prequel. And then Jaws 14 was a new era in terror, which is where Jaws starts a family. And then in Jaws 15, he battles a Russian shark named Ivan Sharkovsky. And then in Jaws 16, he takes a bite out of the Big Apple. Jaws 17, 50 Scales of Grey, he learnt about love from a mysterious stranger, which is how you can tell this video was made in 2015. And then Jaws Origins is a reboot, which is implied in the trailer to have been good. And then Jaws 19, this time it's really, really personal, because that's the tagline that was in Back to the Future.
Right. Is it not depressing how not that far from actual examples this parody series is? We've seen sequels that comply to all of the tropes listed in them, and we've seen...
Well, I think that's the point, is that they're taking real tropes.
And I love that, in a similar way that it's very cute that Back to the Future presumed that 2015 would see such technological advancements when we weren't even that close. But it's also funny that back then, a film having 4 sequels was they're never going to stop. You know, like
Yeah, well-
that's where the joke comes from. Is they had 3 sequels, but it's like that's not that many. Shrek has 3 sequels. No one's complaining about how they keep making Shrek movies.
Why? People are complaining they're not making enough of them. But
I'd say got to break into Area 51, dude. Steal Shrek 5.
It's funny as well that I mean, I'm sure we'll get to this at some point in the future, but Predator, the franchise, was invented because they'd made 2 sequels to Rocky, and they were like, and the news of a 4th one being made came out, and they were like, well, fuck, what's he gonna fight? An alien? And then someone was like, wait, Rocky versus aliens, that's pretty good. And so they made Predator, then they wrote Predator. And that was the idea of a 4th sequel being ridiculous, a 3rd sequel being ridiculous.
Yeah.
The 4th movie.
That's so funny that after like a couple of Rocky movies, they're like, there's no one else he could possibly fight except for something ridiculous as an alien.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So, continue the franchise. What do you got, big boy?
What's my sequel? So, this is something that I've kind of rejiggered into being a continue the franchise. It's more something that occurred to me while watching the sequels. And so, it's a reimagining of Jaws 2 to 4, a recut. Maybe I'm just remaking them, whatever it is. But I basically had the realization that the Jaws sequels are way more interesting if there isn't a shark in them. So if Jaws 2 has the exact same plot, except there isn't actually a shark. So it's Brody, 4 years on, dealing with the PTSD of the first film, convinced that there's another shark pack, but there actually isn't. And it's just a really sad story of how people are like forever scarred by these like things that change their lives, and maybe goes a little more sad. Like, because I was just watching it and I was like, this would be so much more interesting if there actually wasn't a shark in it. If Brody was just like, if the mayor was right, and because at one point he like finds like an undersea photo that was taken by some missing divers, and he's like, there, you can clearly see it's a shark in the photo, and I could, like, the others can't see the shark in the photo. I couldn't really see the shark in the photo.
So you're going like a Friday the 13th New Beginning way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So Jaws 3D, I actually found myself oddly invested in the Brody brothers' lives.
The Bro Bros.
The Bro Bros. Because, so Michael Brody, him and his like partner, he's got like a job opportunity in Vanuatu or something. And so the whole movie he's talking about how he's got to go to Vanuatu, and they're like, at one point he says to her, because they're like in love, and he says to her, like, you know, at some point you and me are going to have to have a serious conversation about us. And I was like, this kind of, you know, I'm kind of invested in this. I'd like to see where it goes. And in the end, it turns out she decides to go with him, and she's like, but, you know, wherever I get pulled to next year, and he's like, I'll follow you anywhere you want to go. And it was, I don't know, inexplicably in this 10% movie, I bought into like this charming, quaint love story. And the story of Sean, his story gets cut short maybe before the third act of the film. He's not really in the last act of the film, because Leah Thompson gets her leg bitten by a shark, the shark. But the first part of the story is he turns up to SeaWorld, meets Leah Thompson's character, and it's through her nurturing and her love that he actually steps back into the water for the first time since he was scarred. I mean, in this canon, it's from Jaws 2. If there wasn't a shark in Jaws 2, you can find some other reason why he's scared of water. And it's like him overcoming his fear. And I was like, this is compelling. This is all right. It's not bad stuff. And then Jaws the Revenge, again, it is probably more interesting to watch the story of a woman whose son was eaten by a shark, go to the Bahamas, and is convinced that there's a shark following her when there actually isn't. And it's like the story about how Michael Caine, this like charming biplane pilot, turns up.
There was a filmed subplot about him like smuggling drugs and shit like that as well. That, you know,
wow,
add further into her delusions.
Yeah, you could add that into it, and it's like a As Good as It Gets Jack Nicholson type story of like elderly love, you know, between like someone with a traumatic thing that's happened to them, going on holiday and learning how to find hope with a charming pilot she meets in the Bahamas. And that's my pitch, is just take the shark out of the sequels. They become better movies.
That's great. So I've got a couple of ideas for my continued franchise. One is to just finally make Jaws 5 People Zero.
Mm-hmm.
But the other one, I just keep going further with making the shark fucking a supervillain.
Yeah.
That I don't have a good subtitle or anything like that, but have him come out of the water.
Yeah.
And walk
Jaws
around.
Evolution. And it's just, they through a scientific experiment, they rapidly increase the speed at which a creature can evolve and target it on a great white shark because, humans came from the ocean. And within days, it's on land and it'd be a human, I guess. It wouldn't be a shark. All right. And it's midpoint between ape and fish. It's like a terrifying shark with legs.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. Just go nuts with it. He's following again, the son of the mayor who's now getting into politics or something like that. You know?
Because what Spielberg clearly didn't understand with Jaws 3D is that once your series becomes a shadow of its former self, you have two choices. You either attempt to scramble some kind of pride and some kind of seriousness and attempt to make it still at least try to be as good, or you increase that shadow. You make that shadow even larger by going deeper and deeper into it, which produces the more enjoyable films.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right, is that Jaws?
That's Jaws.
And all that Jaws. That should be a sequel from the Jaws 19 trailer.
Yeah, I did. I was going to pitch. My other idea was to do an underwater, Jurassic Park type film called Jaws Jurassic Park.
Nice. You've pitched that before.
Yeah, I have. All right. Well, that is Film Franchise Fortnights for another fortnight.
Whoa!
We're doing something very special next fortnight, aren't we, AJ? Do you want to explain that?
I will, but before I do, Richard, I would just like to compel people
to go leave a 5-star review on iTunes.
Do it. Leave a 5-star review on iTunes, but then also you can leave us a 5-star review on Facebook and like our Facebook page, Cult Popture. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can subscribe to us on Acast and iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram, where we post photos of us watching each movie as we watch it. So do all that kind of shit, and that's how we become a podcast with plenty more 2-star reviews, which is always the goal. So next week, next fortnight, we're doing something a little bit different. For Halloween, we are doing kind of a sequel to the podcast we did last Christmas, which was called Film Franchise Fortnights Festive Fan Fiasco. Where we went to 3 of our patrons, but also fans, and we were like, hey, a lot of the things that people will send us messages asking about is, can we come on the podcast and talk about a franchise with you? And the way, if you want to be part of that, if you want to go into the draw, becoming a patron is the way to do that. So you can actually do that at patreon.com/cultpopture. So next week we are doing the Freaky Fan Fiasco. Richard, next fortnight, sorry. Film Franchise Fortnights Freaky Fan Fiasco, where we are watching 2 film horror franchises with 3 different guests. So 1 guest per 2 film franchise. Yeah. And those franchises are, if you're wanting to watch along, because I think one of them especially is going to very much benefit if you've seen... Actually, probably all of them. So, what franchises, 2 film franchises are we going to be discussing?
We have got An American Werewolf in London and An American Werewolf in Paris. Mm-hmm. That's one franchise. And we've got Happy Death Day and its sequel, Happy Death Day 2. And then we also have 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later.
Yes, so please watch those films if you can. I'm just expecting it of our listeners now to watch the films that we talk about. And we'll be back in 1 fortnight time to talk. You're going to get 3 mini episodes of this show in 1 episode. Yeah. And next week on the show, I don't want to spoil what it is, but it's Halloween themed and it's very spooky.
Yeah.
Spookier than a shark having revenge in the Bahamas.
All right. And we're not just stalling for ideas. We actually do have something. And we've actually already recorded part of it before we did this. So,
Yeah,
a little
so-
hint for you.
Shut up.
So
Kyle.
fuck off. Don't. Well,
See ya.
do, because this podcast's over. And just
5
go
stars
do
on
whatever you
iTunes.
want.
5 stars on iTunes.